So we've had all of this talk about inequality over the last three talks, and so you might think to yourself, with all this inequality, it might be a good idea to eliminate some of it and try and establish social groups that are more egalitarian and organized in a less hierarchical way. But we might encounter some psychological problems with doing that, and that's what I'm going to talk about, especially in the context of hierarchical or egalitarian workplaces. And this is work that I've done in collaboration with Aaron Kay, Richard Ibach, and Adam Galinsky. So if we focus in on workplaces and organizations, hierarchy is a defining feature of many organizations. But that said, there are examples, such as this one, of organizations that try and create more flat organizational structures with the idea that we have, let's say, co-workers instead of employees and managers and that type of thing. But many media or academic accounts of these attempts, note that hierarchy still seems to kind of like bubble up and emerge when, even though we've tried to create flat organizational structures. And so, why is that the case? It seems as if hierarchies are supported by a myriad of factors. So, for example, in the psychological literature, hierarchies have functional benefits. They enhance group coordination and communication. Hierarchies also contribute to status quo maintenance and needs to believe that our social systems are fair, and as well group-based dominance. So if your group is in charge, you're motivated to maintain group-based hierarchies. And as well as at an individual level, hierarchies contribute to power and status for those at the top. So if you're at the top, you have power, status, and resources that people at the bottom don't lack. So that's, for this person at the top of the hierarchy, he gets power and status. But what about these people on the side who might not be at privileged levels of the hierarchy, yet often still seem to support them? What psychological needs might they be getting from the existence of a hierarchy? And that's the research question that we're looking at today. So what we propose is that hierarchies are specifically conducive to fulfilling psychological needs for structure and for order that are induced, especially when people are in circumstances of low personal control. And so the structured nature of hierarchies, I mean that they're clear and orderly and predictable. People know their roles and what they should be doing, and this sense of structure and order might be appealing to somebody psychologically in some circumstances. So this hierarchy comes out of compensatory control theory. This is a little metaphor that is nice to use for this. So compensatory control theory suggests that people have a desired level of order that they want to perceive in the world because perceiving randomness is aversive. And that the go-to means of perceiving that the world is orderly is by perceiving that you have personal control over events in your life. But of course, belief in absolute personal control is impossible to maintain at all times, and it's sometimes threatened. And when it is threatened, people will turn to external sources of order as a way of reestablishing this illusion of control over the world. So these things might be belief that God is in control of the world, or belief that the government is in control of the world. And research has identified many sources of compensatory order with folk beliefs. People will even believe that their enemies are powerful because that's predictable, even if it's not in their own interest. Conspiracy theories, orderly scientific theories, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we hypothesize that hierarchies, to the extent that they're structured and orderly, might provide a sense of compensatory order, and in this way they would have psychological advantages that equality, being less orderly on average, might not offer. So I have 4 studies here that get at this idea. Studies 1 and 2 investigate our main question, whether threats to personal control that elicit needs for structure will lead people to prefer more hierarchy in the workplace. Study 3 looks at kind of the reverse relationship, whether engagement in a workplace hierarchy produces more of a sense of personal control. And then study 4 is a bit of a future direction, where we looked at whether personal control needs can still be satisfied in flat organizations. So if people have these ideals for flat organizations, are they still able to satisfy those same personal control needs for order? Okay, so in study 1, we either threatened or unthreatened, did not threaten personal control. And the hypothesis is that when personal control is threatened, people would prefer more workplace hierarchy. So the way we did this is by having people read a fake newspaper article. That's the type of mundane information that they encounter that might threaten their sense of personal control on a daily basis. And basically use 2 different threat passages, although we predicted the same results for both threat passages. The first one was directed specifically at the economy, talking about how it was unpredictable and disorderly. The second one referred to kind of the world generally being unorderly and unpredictable. And then a neutral passage was similar in style, but just talked about career choices and farming being an acceptable career choice. So same style, but unrelated to control. And then we just asked people what their preference was for workplace hierarchy. So this was a scale with items like, in every workplace, it's important to have some people who are in charge of other people. Okay, so here are the results. We have the two threat conditions on the right and the neutral condition on the left. And it was what we expected. So a contrast comparing the economic control threat and the general control threat to the neutral condition showed that people preferred more workplace hierarchy in those conditions, although the effect was slightly stronger with the economic control threat. So this supported our initial hypothesis. But it could be the case that this effect is occurring more strongly for people who are threatened, and then they expect to be on the top of the hierarchy because they have a sense of illusory control, and that's why they prefer hierarchy. So although these effects did occur independent of participants' own workplace status, so whether they were at a low or high position in their own workplace hierarchy didn't seem to moderate these effects. In study 2, we wanted to look at the effect of expected status more directly. So again, we threatened people's personal control or not by this time having them write about a time when they lacked control or had control, and then assess their preference for hierarchy-enhancing jobs. And so what I mean by hierarchy-enhancing jobs is these are jobs taken from past research on social dominance theory, and they either enhanced or maintained group-based differences or diminished group-based differences. So for example, a job that's high in status might be a communications director, and if it's hierarchy enhancing, they might have worked for a corporation dedicated to exacerbating income differences between individuals, or they could have worked for, in a hierarchy attenuating role, the United Way, which was still a communications director, but they, the purpose of the organization is to diminish group-based differences between people. Then we also had low status jobs. So this was a regional office contact for a real estate company that was either a corporate company or was basically a gentrifying company. So exacerbating group differences, or the Department of Urban Housing in the United States. So making more equitable housing. Okay, so they read 20 different jobs, and this was within subjects. Okay, and so what we predicted is that control threats would lead people to express more interest in these hierarchy-enhancing jobs, and that's what we found at both levels of status. So it wasn't just that control threats led people to prefer hierarchy in high-status jobs, but also in low-status jobs. And so what this suggests is that hierarchy might be fulfilling these needs for control and status even when you don't expect to be at the top, that it's also in these middle positions of the hierarchy. Okay, so what we've seen is that personal control led to higher preference for workplace hierarchy, even when you expect it to be in lower status positions. And next, we wanted to look at whether being in a hierarchy is associated with having more personal control, so kind of this reverse relationship. So perceptions of structure and order are key building blocks for long-term goal pursuit, and external structure is crucial for promoting individual goal-directed action. So to the extent that hierarchy can provide the structure and serve as an outlet of compensatory control, then being engaged in a hierarchy should produce more certainty and self-efficacy about your workplace situation. So what we did is recruit employed participants through Mechanical Turk for this study. We also hypothesized a boundary condition. So structure, hierarchies can only provide this sense of certainty and structure, if they're structured. So hierarchies do, of course, differ in the level of structure that they have, and so unstructured hierarchies shouldn't be control restoring in this way. So we have these employed or full or part-time participants, and this is a correlational study, and we measured hierarchy in their own workplace, first of all. So they were given a number of pictures that were hierarchically shaped, and they were asked to rate the extent to which their own workplace was similar to these images, and we also asked them directly how hierarchical is your workplace. Our measure of whether the hierarchy was considered structured or not was a measure of procedural justice. So procedural justice is the extent to which workplace procedures are applied consistently and fairly. So that is a sense of structure. And also we asked participants' own workplace status, again to make sure that the control-restoring nature of hierarchy wasn't just limited to people at the tops of their own workplace hierarchies. For outcomes, we measured the certainty and self-efficacy that they had about their careers. So certainty was items like, to what extent are you certain about the direction that your career is heading? And self-efficacy were things like, if I'm in trouble at work, I would know I'd be able to do something to solve that problem. Okay, so here's what we found. I have this in multiple regression, where we have the level of workplace hierarchy on the bottom of the graph, and then the two DBs, certainty and self-efficacy, and the lines are split the 3 levels of procedural justice. So we can see that employees in more hierarchical workplaces felt more effective and more certain about their roles and their career outcomes, and more so that this association didn't occur when one's work environment was low in procedural justice, presumably because you can't count on that hierarchy to be predictable and structured. And of importance, these effects occurred regardless of participants' own workplace status, their own position in their workplaces. Status did have its own independent effects. Of course, we saw, and that's consistent with the talks we saw today, people who are higher in status also feel more self-efficacy, but that was independent of these other effects. Okay, so next we wanted to look in kind of some future directions. So given that flat organizations are more in line with people's ideals in many cases, and they often report that they would prefer things to be more equal than they are, especially in political contexts we saw, we wondered whether flat organizations can also serve control needs if there's some structure present. So when personal control is low, even flat workplaces should become more appealing when there's a sense of structure there. So in this study, personal control was threatened or unthreatened by having people write about a time when they lacked control or had control. And then they read about a flat organization, a mock newspaper article. And it was described as either structured, or we didn't have any references to structure. It was just positive in other ways. And then we asked how appealing would be this company to work at. Okay, so this is an example of the newspaper article. It was one that I actually took and just tweaked because this is a big workplace trend, so it was easy to find. The boss stops here. We have these non-hierarchical workplaces, and maybe people are creative and happier, but are they going to be effective? So in the one condition, we had a passage saying, there's still structure to be found here, even though we don't have levels, employee roles and responsibilities are still well defined. And in the unspecified condition, just referred to them to be unstructured and lacking structure. But you can still be creative here. So they weren't just, it wasn't a negative statement, it was still positive in other ways. So, okay, so what did we find? When structure was highlighted, the expected effects, the company became more appealing for people whose sense of personal control was threatened when there was structure there. In the structure unspecified condition, not quite what the pattern we would have expected. I would have expected a complete crossover interaction. So when there's a lack of structure, the threat would actually make that more unappealing. But this new zeitgeist of not always presenting perfect findings is here. So I'm gonna, you can see it's there. But so I do think that this is a finding that needs more work. That we need to see for sure whether structured organizations are able to fill these types of same types of psychological needs as hierarchical structures, at least as far as control is concerned. And so, but we think this is like a promising first finding anyway. Okay. So here in summary, personal control led to higher preference for workplace hierarchy and made hierarchical jobs more appealing, even when you didn't expect to be at the top. These effects often occurred independent of workplace status, and as well, working in a hierarchical workplace promotes the sense of certainty and self-efficacy in the workplace. And as well, the appeal of flat workplaces was affected by control threats when that structure was salient, but we want to look more at that. Yeah. So this suggests that people might resist changes to hierarchical organizations if that hierarchy is fulfilling important psychological needs, and people who desire more egalitarian social structures might run into resistance in this way. But we could turn to structured egalitarianism instead. One direction we want to look at in the future is, will these results carry over to other contexts like political contexts? Workplaces kind of have a natural hierarchy already, so maybe people are more amenable to hierarchy in those circumstances. So, it remains to be seen whether we can carry over. We do have some promising initial results that I can talk about, but that's the future direction. So, okay, thank you very much.